I'm not sure if this question is for you, but it certainly needs to be asked of the difference between the OPA version of this 252 and the PPRB version, which is where Graham versus Connor was added back in. In our meeting where we went over the use of force policy 252, we were especially vocal about Graham versus Connor not being in it. Ms. Vandevender spoke eloquently about the feelings that she, and I think she spoke for the board when she said that the union's feedback on this to put Graham versus Connor back in to put Graham versus Connor back in would be counter to what the presentation we got from the commander. The commander talked in particular about Graham versus Connor and why it wasn't put in. And then Ms. Vandevender spoke very eloquently about how we were so glad that that was not the case. So you can imagine when we see this with Graham versus Connor back in this policy now, it feels like the whole conversation we had was circumvented. It may be that there's a reason for putting it back in. Heaven knows I don't know what it is. And I would like somebody to tell me how we got from the meeting that it wasn't in the policy to the meeting that it is. And in particular, the commander who spoke to us talked about being directive to the police officers and not confusing. And in my read of this PPRB draft, it has Graham versus Connor and de-escalation. And those two things, I think the commander was right to say they don't belong together. And I think it adds confusion. I agree with some of the speakers who spoke earlier. I want to understand how this got changed to include this thing. We all agreed ahead of time, with the exception of the union, that would not be in there. So how did we get to this place?
Chair Waits? Member Fine, I will defer to Mr. Schmiel for the specific details about that conversation. Obviously, I was not privy to the board's decision regarding the Graham standards and being included in the policy before the PPRB meeting. But certainly Director Cass and I'm sorry, Dr. Cass and Director Harness were at that meeting when those specific changes were discussed. I believe it was on July 10th, 2018. My understanding is also that both Dr. Cass and Director Harness voted for that version that went through. As for how it got from from being out to inside the policy, I'll defer to Mr. Schmiel to answer those specific questions, which I think have been previously addressed before, but I will defer to him again.
Not to my satisfaction. I need more information.
Chair Waits and board members, good evening. So the June OPA meeting, which took place here at the Police Oversight Board, had that draft there, and there was discussion. There was considerable discussion, and Ms. Vandeventer read her comment. Now, after that, and I think that it's really important to keep this within the context of policy development, and this is a draft. And when you look at 352, you have the Office of Policy Analysis, and that was the first time it was ever held in public, and those comments were gathered. Then what took place after that was, as 352 stipulates, the Power DMS, it was posted to Power DMS, which is that internal document sharing software, and then comments were received by sworn personnel. And then on top of that, the Chief of Police and Commander Middleton went to the Academy and had several meetings with sworn personnel, talking to them about the policy.